And can you take us off?
Okay. Can you hear us?
We're unmuted.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we have Jeannie Bennett from English, and take it away. All right. I'm going to do this real quick because there's too much stuff on these slides. So I teach technical writing, technical and professional writing in the English department. I like to joke that I'm like one of the only non-English people in the English department. My background is technical communication and rhetoric, and I have a STEM background. So I specialize in teaching writing to STEM majors who typically have had really bad experiences. They hate writing. They think they're bad writers. They've been told that they probably had like a really angry high school English teacher with a red pen. So when they come into my classroom, they dread it. They think that it's, and they're very defensive. This class doesn't have anything to do with my major. It really means I'm a bad writer. I'm afraid you're going to, treat me like crap. So I'm trying to get them really engaged. I want to create a situation where they want to come to the classroom and they see that what we're learning in the classroom is useful for their future career, but just for their lives. And so one of the things I've tried to do, I'm skipping through a lot of this and I apologize, but I'm trying to utilize project-based learning, which is really a gold standard in a lot of engineering programs. And the true project-based learning is not, here's a project, go do it. It's let's take a whole group of kids to Africa and say, look, they don't have water purification here. How do we create a water purification system? It's really getting a class to work on an actual real life problem. And learning on the fly. I can't do that because I'm an English teacher, and in the English department we have no funding, so I don't have an active learning classroom. Sometimes I get to use the ones here on campus, but a lot of times they're taken up. So sometimes I'm in the wrong kind of classroom. I have dry erase markers. That's what our funding gets. So we don't have a laboratory, we don't have a lot of, stuff. And even though I have a background in the sciences, I'm published in biochemistry, I'm not an engineer or a computer science person. So unless I link my class, which I'd love to do one day, but is not currently what's going on, we can't work on an actual technical problem. And that's the number one thing that students complain is I want to work on something that's really relevant for my career. And I'm like, well, I'm not an engineer. So what I've come up with currently, I've been working on this for years and years. In the last 3 years, I've been working on a project where I'm trying to it's project-based learning, but it's simulation. So students, I tell them all the time that I want them to learn how to write contextually. So how are we actually going to use writing in the workplace and in our career? And I know how we do this because I used to be a scientist, but it's like your boss is not going to say, I want a 5-page paper on X topic using 10 sources in MLA format. That's never going to happen. So unless you're in academia, right? But they're none of them are going to go into academia. So we learn writing based on working on a project, right? We have to pitch ideas. We have to have progress reports. We have to analyze data and communicate that data. We have to give presentations. We have to write design reports. So I've created this sequence where we have a project that we're working on. I've tasked them with a design problem for repurposing plastic bags into a useful household item. So how can we get people to see plastic bags not as a waste product, but as a resource? And we go into all the background of recycling and the problem of plastic waste, etc. But this is really cheap, right? We can go find glue sticks and plastic bags. And then I've created this sequence of assignments that mimics how it would actually work in the workplace, right? Or in a lab if you're working in a lab. So it's a combination of individual and group assignments with reflective components throughout as well. So first, they have to get into groups, and each member of the group research existing designs. So a lot of them go the crafty route because that's what we have resources for. Some people go a little bit more construction. So some people will look at how to create a hammock with plarn, or how to create insulation, cheap insulation for your windows, or whatever. And each member of the group gets to have a say in the project because they can research whatever they want. And they each write a feasibility memo that evaluates the usefulness of the idea based on the criteria for the assignment. Then the whole group gets together and they brainstorm everybody's, whatever you came up with. And they have to come up with a new idea as a group, but it has to be original or in a modification of existing, for fair use purposes, because that's kind of how things work in the real world. And then they will write a proposal, or they'll present it depending on the semester and how many classes I'm teaching and how much time I have to grade, where they pitch their idea to me as their project supervisor so I can approve it. After that, they each then get a chance to reflect on what they're learning. Then they come back and they actually build the object in the classroom and we document our process. Everybody has a role. So everybody, like this person's going to bring, the glue sticks. This person's going to bring the ironing board. This person's going to take notes. We have roles where everyone's a writer, editor, and reviewer. So there's a lot of, everyone gets to contribute in a very concrete way. Then they actually create this object, document their process. They create a user guide teaching, they have to pick an audience, but we go with WSU students because that's easy, how to recreate their object and educating them about why repurposing is important. And then they actually usability test it in the classroom. So they bring their guides and extra materials, and we have 2 weeks where it's like arts and crafts in the classroom, and everyone's like live testing the user guide, and then they're giving each other lots of feedback. And it's amazing the kind of insights that they come up with afterward, because they're like, wow, I actually thought this was very clear, and apparently it was very confusing. So they do another reflection. And then they turn in the final user guide, and then they evaluate their design using a design report. So it's a project, but it's also, I'm trying to link writing to the real life situation. So it is a writing classroom, but a lot of times it doesn't really trick them, but they really get into it. So I go from a class where everyone thinks that writing is important and they're not valuable, to right now I'm reading their reflective reports, and they're saying things like, I couldn't wait to come to class. I used to hate English classes. This class felt very cozy. I felt like I really mattered, to my teammates. They have an increased understanding of their own strengths and weaknesses as a team member, and when they screw up, how it affects everyone around them. I saw a huge uptick in attendance. Hardly anyone ever skips anymore because they know that their group will be left in the wind. There are occasional times where we do have some lower attendance, but we're working on it. And then they have higher quality work, and it's more original because they care, right? I've gotten them to where this is not just some random assignment. I'm telling you what to do. You came up with this idea. It's your original creative work. And a lot of times I'll encourage them to submit stuff to Circa. I'm like, you really could keep working on this. And I treat them more as like researchers that I'm just guiding. And so they are really invested in it. And so they do a fabulous job. And I'm trying to get them to see writing as like rhetorically flexible to the situation and like a solution to a problem, rather than a report is a series of fixed rules that you have to recreate. It's, you're attendant to certain things in the situation, and that's what this document is doing. And so there are some problems. We have some regular student issues, right? We'll have days where sometimes when we're building the prototype, they'll come to class and like, well, since it's my project anyway, and I don't actually have to be in the classroom, we could do this anywhere, right? And then they'll like not come to class occasionally. That's usually the 12 o'clock class, right? They're hungry, they want to go to lunch. So sometimes they take too much ownership and they'll see me as not as necessary. And then sometimes it's the opposite. They want me to tell them what to do. But most of the students, get into it, and it resolves a lot of engagement problems. But you're always going to have engagement problems as a professor. So I'm still working on how to kind of, do that. And then I have to be like a guide, but I also have to be the expert. So I do have to try to balance out. I've noticed they want 15 or 20 minutes of lecture here and there, and then go to work. Rather, the pure active learning, they flounder. And I actually had that experience as a student as well. So we have to balance that. This isn't really lecture. It's more, I'm the expert giving you guidance, and then you go apply it type thing. And then they do a lot of active learning in the classroom. So one of the things that came up this semester in their final reflective reports was, I'm so proud of my work. I feel a lot more confident in writing for the workplace. And they'll talk about developing empathy for other people through the writing, which I never would have thought of that as a course learning outcome, but it seems to really have increased, engagement. And it's still a struggle, like that balance of work and project and me and them, but I think it's going pretty well. So, okay. Anyway, I'm just blowing through this for time, but thank you.